Hello and welcome to week 7 of the Nevermoor Series Readalong. I'm Jess Townsend, the author of the Nevermoor books, and this is the week. We're doing it. We're going green. This is the home stretch. It's 3 weeks until SILVERBORN is out in the world, and so we have 3 weeks to get through this bad boy. How did you go? We were tackling chapters 1 to 12 this week, so I'm going to have to start getting much more judicious about the sports highlights that I give you and the level of detail that I go into, because these chunks are getting bigger. 12 is the most chapters we've done so far, and then the next 2 will be 13 chapters each. So I'm going to try and pare down the detail a little bit, but you know, let's be real, these videos are never exactly going to be short. Stick around to the end. I will be announcing the winner of the giveaway for the end of Wundersmith, so the winner of the 3 special edition books and these patches. Let's do it. We got no time to waste. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, Unit 919. Let's go. Sports highlights. So we open on platform 919, the unit's private station, waiting for Miss Cheery to come and pick them up. It is the last day of the term, and on their way into school on home train, she gives them all a new timetable for some weird reason. What a strange thing to do on the last day of the term. But they have a fresh timetable because they have a brand new class. That afternoon, they all have the same class, and it is simply called C&D, and Miss Cheery is not allowed to tell them what C&D stands for, but that doesn't stop them all from guessing. Thadia guesses camouflage and disguise. Totally respectable guess. Mahir says costumes and drama, also reasonable. Anas suggests cats and dogs, less likely, but still probably my favourite guess. Hawthorne guesses climbing and doing something, which I feel like he really phoned it in. Creation and destruction, chanting and dancing, chips and dip. Actually, that one might be my favourite. It's none of those things. It's not any of those things, but still Miss Cheery's mouth is zipped. She's not allowed to tell anyone. As they head into school, Unit 919 together, Morrigan hears someone, an older scholar, hiss the word Wundersmith under their breath. And this is what she's been dealing with since what happened at the end of Wundersmith. This is the fallout from the elders making her reveal to everyone in the Wondersociety that she is a Wundersmith, and telling them that they have to keep it a secret. Is that kind of no one's happy about it, and people have been a little bit nasty to her about it. But Cadence is there to stand up for her, and she tells the student to bite their tongue, which they do, hilariously. And Anara overhears it, and she says, I saw that, Cadence. You know we're not supposed to use our knacks on other students. And she does threaten to tell her scholar mistress. But Morrigan thinks, good luck telling Mrs. Murgatroyd, because I haven't been able to find her for weeks. So we know from the end of Wundersmith that Morrigan is now part of the Arcane School, the School of Arcane Arts. And that was supposed to somehow lead to her learning the wretched arts of the accomplished Wundersmith. But so far, that has not materialised, and Mrs. Murgatroyd has been strangely hard to get a hold of. So Morrigan has been doing some really cool classes. Like, it's better than her previous timetable of doing 2 classes ever. What's she been doing? Peering into the future, finding your familiar, opening a dialogue with the dead. Lots of cool and interesting classes, but as she's saying to Cadence, kind of nothing to do with being a Wundersmith or learning the wretched arts, and that's the whole point of why she was supposed to be there. And yeah, they don't know what's going on there. So anyway, Cadence and Morrigan meet up with Lamb, and they go to the classroom where they are going to have this C&D lesson, and it's a strange tiny little classroom, and when they walk in, everyone's there but there's no teacher, and the room goes dark and it's a little bit creepy. And then, even creepier, Lamb says, shh, watch the wall. It's about to begin. Chapter 2. A carefully manoeuvred sequence of events. So they're watching the wall, and an image flickers into life, projected in front of them, and it's one that they remember. It's a scene they know very well. It's their own inauguration ceremony from a year ago. So they're watching themselves lined up outside the gates of Wonsock, and they see the floral sign that says, come in and join us. But it's a little different this time. They have a very different perspective. Something very, very creepy is happening. All the while, behind them, crawling out of the darkness, were dozens of... Morrigan didn't quite know what they were. Monsters, she supposed. They were dark-scaled creatures, fleshy and many-limbed, not quite animals, but barely human. They crawled on the ground, pulled along by powerful forearms, and dragged long, muscular tails behind them. Their strangely humanoid faces were angular and wide, their eyes as black as their scales, glittering like beetles. Morrigan had never seen anything like them in her life. They were like an experiment gone wrong, snakes turned nearly human, or vice versa. Even looking at them on film, she felt a visceral, primitive urge to run, yet she was frozen to the spot. And so they all kind of experience this same strange feeling because they're watching a scene that has already happened. They know no monsters ate them that night, and yet it certainly seems like they're going to be eaten by some monsters that are creeping up behind them. But instead, what happens is this. Seconds before the prowling creatures would have reached them, more figures came out of the darkness. Human figures this time, sorcerers in black one-sock cloaks, and silently herded the beasts back into the shadows, wielding firelit branches and swinging strange, smoking talismans. And Morrigan notices that all of the kids have no idea, including herself, that this is happening, except for one. Lamb stood at the end of the row of children, peering back into the darkness, her eyes wide with terror. "You never said anything," Morrigan said quietly, turning to look at Lamb. The light from the projection illuminated her face. "Why didn't you tell us?" Lamb's chin trembled a little. It just seemed kinda not to. This feels very kind of typical Lamb. It's for a 12-year-old, really for anyone, but particularly for a 12-year-old to have the presence of mind to do something this kind of generous and noble, because it is quite a generous act to be bearing witness to something. And she knows, because she's an oracle, of course, that nothing bad is necessarily going to happen to them, but it doesn't make them any less terrifying. So she knows she doesn't have to alert the other kids to the fact that they're there, and so she doesn't, because what would be the purpose? Just to terrify them, just so they can experience the horror that she's experiencing. And so it is a really kind thing that she does. And yeah, typical Lamb, basically. So they see themselves walk into the school, and basically what follows in this inauguration spectacular that they have already seen. Because if you think back to it, the only thing that they needed to do in that whole ceremony was recite their oath and get their little W pins. And that could all have been done in about 5 minutes on their first day at school. They didn't need to have this big show with, you know, the dragons riding in the sky and the rainbow archway and the marching band. None of that was necessary, and it all, even to Morrigan at the time, I think she thought it all felt like weirdly kind of over the top. But this is what it was for. It turns out it was necessary because it was demonstrating a really important thing about the Wonder Society for them now. So they're in this room and they hear Elder Quinn's voice come over a loudspeaker to explain what it is that they are seeing. For many years, Elder Quinn's voice echoed around them. The Wonder Society has had one mission, one unified, secret purpose, expressed in 2 discrete yet equally important tasks. We call this purpose, for want of a grander title, containment and distraction. Not cats and dogs or chips and dip, sadly. And this concept of containment and distraction, Elder Quinn explains it to them, but they are also seeing it. And it was really important for them to, like, it's again, typical Wonder Society, it's a mean trick that they have played. It's a mean, really, really creepy trick. But also, from their perspective, it's necessary. Because yes, they could have just told them. Elder Quinn could have said, hey, guess what? We do this thing called containment and distraction, and this is kind of what it's about. But for them to have experienced it themselves from the perspective of the public that they are protecting is a totally different thing. So what they're witnessing is, in this ridiculous, spectacular show of their ceremony, their welcome ceremony to the Wonder Society, they saw their names being written in dragonfire in the sky, but that was to distract them from the whinging woods that had uprooted themselves and were marching towards them. And they see a rainbow archway that's designed to distract them from an army of spiders that are skittering across. All of these ridiculous things. They also see the Wonder Society members in the black cloaks that were in the trees, sort of watching them as they walked up to Proudfoot House. Turned out not to have been Wonder Society members at all. In fact, They turn out not to have been human, just doing a good imitation of it. The figures seem to unfold from their vaguely human facsimile, shifting into what must have been their true form. Enormous vulture-like creatures, hunched and haunted-looking, with yellow eyes and great hook-like talons. And Elder Quinn goes on to explain what they're seeing. To understand your future in the Wonder Society, you must know our past. The Society was founded for a very particular purpose. Until just over 100 years ago, our entire mission was to support the work of 9 people. Those 9, elevated and exalted above all others, had a mission of their own, to serve, protect, and improve the lives of the citizens of our realm. They were the Wundersmiths. 9 human beings, gifted above all others, chosen, many believed, by the wondrous divinities themselves, the ancient deities who were once said to have watched over our realm. In exchange for the powers they've been blessed with, the Wundersmiths would dedicate the entirety of their lifetimes to mastering their craft and using their power wholly in service to others. So these 9 people who were gifted these powers, they were born and reborn again. So there was always 9 of them, just on this never-ending cycle. And what began to happen was this kind of corruption of these 9 Wundersmiths. They began to kind of get ideas above their station, and people began to worship the Wundersmiths themselves rather than the wondrous divinities who supposedly gifted them these powers. They began to see the Wundersmiths themselves, the humans, as these objects of devotion and worship, which made the Wundersmiths power hungry and dangerous, and they started to do bad things and make dangerous, wondrous acts, until all of this of course culminated in the most dangerous, power hungry Wundersmith of all, Ezra Squall, who tried to take over Nevermoor to conquer the city with his army of monsters. And we all know how that turned out. Nevermoor kicked him out, and now he's been in exile for 100 years. And in those 100 years, the Wondrous Society has essentially shifted its purpose. So instead of being there to support these 9 Wondersmiths in their work, the Wondrous Society now is cleaning up after all of the work of many, many, many Wondersmiths past. So there are no more Wondersmiths in Nevermoor to maintain or control or destroy or whatever these dangerous things, and so the Wondrous Society has to kind of do the best they can, and they themselves are not Wondersmiths, but they use every tool at their disposal. So witchery and sorcery and brute strength and every kind of different talent that is contained within the Wondrous Society, and diplomacy, basically to try to contain and control all of these dangerous messes, all of these relics scattered over the city of Nevermoor that the Wondersmiths left behind. Over many ages and with tireless, meticulous work, Elder Quinn continued as the room rushed onwards. Oh, the room is now moving. The room is moving like a rail pod, up and down and all over the place, getting them to some destination, we don't know what. And this is how she describes it. Containment and distraction is like trying to plug 1,000 tiny leaking holes using only 10 fingers, Elder Quinn told them. It is an endless, thankless, dirty, dangerous, repetitious job, but one that we are privileged to perform. And now, that privilege is also yours. How nice. I know what you're all wondering. Same thing they wonder every year. What does this mean for you? Have you been unwittingly drafted into an army to fight against the forces of darkness to spend the rest of your lives battling the creatures of the night? I mean, yeah, kind of, that's exactly what's just happened. But she explains to them, if that's what you want, but really, depending on your talents and your disposition and what you want, you might lean more into containment, which is basically the plugging of the holes, the controlling of the many dangers and the cleaning up of the messes, the dirty work, basically, or more distraction, which is kind of one of the things that the society does really well, is they have all of these talented people who are supposedly doing all of these interesting, wonderful things, and they're kind of like dangling shiny, pretty things in front of the public of Nevermoor, saying, oh, look, we're over here doing this cool thing, to distract from the monster over here that's being contained. And she says, yeah, it depends. We'll see how you go. Let's find out which one you're better at. And then as she's talking, she has been leading them down this hallway, and the doors open behind her, and she says, welcome to the gathering place. Chapter 3, The Gathering Place. So they're brought into this big room, this kind of indoor amphitheatre, where all of these older Wondrous Society members and older scholars are gathered, and they are in the midst of their sort of weekly meeting, their gathering for C&D. And Elder Quinn just says, sit in the back, observe, see what happens. Morrigan is wrangling with her feelings about what they have just learned. It was even more obvious to her now why she had felt so much quiet animosity from the older scholars since they'd learned she was a Wundersmith. It wasn't simply that everyone in Nevermoor knew Wundersmiths were dangerous. The society knew exactly how dangerous they were, exactly how chaotic and messy, exactly how their actions, even from many years ago, could leave scars and unhealed wounds on a city hiding in plain sight. They knew because they were still cleaning up the mess. But on the flip side, that always sensible part of Morrigan that we already know exists, because even when she was a cursed child, she was like, yeah, but I'm not doing these things to these people. That logical voice comes out again and she's like, I didn't make a bunch of snake people and weird vulture thingies. Like, that wasn't me. And she kind of draws herself up and she's like, no, I'm not going to be blamed for everything that Ezra Squall and his cronies did. Like, that's not me. I'm the new kid in town. I have a clean record here and I am not going to let people make me out to be a monster just because I am also a Wundersmith. And so they observe this meeting, and there's introductions of representatives from all these different groups and factions and societies within the society. For example, from the Geographical Oddity Squadron, the Department of Animology and Naturalism, the Unusual Engineering and Infrastructure Advisory Board, that one's a mouthful, the Architectural Anomalies Association. I don't think I've ever read these words out loud before. And the Gobleyan Library. And of course the League of Explorers. Jupiter shows up as well. And finally, from the Beastly Division, we meet Mr. Gavin Squires, who tells them all about the big thing that's happening at the moment, which is the short but magical breeding season of the Nevermoor Scaly Sewer Beast. And they project a big image of this just awful looking scaly sewer beast that makes everyone kind of cringe. And this happens every year. Gavin Squires is like, everyone, you gotta I need some volunteers. If you don't volunteer, you might get voluntold. And he picks out a team of people who are going to help him manage this horrible mission of going down into the sewers and getting literally very dirty to try to kind of gather up all of these baby scaly sewer beasts and relocate them so that they can't then grow up to be big monstrous ones and cause trouble. And this is something that happens regularly, and it seems like they always have to have a distraction. It takes a few hours to do this, and they need to make sure that no eyes are going to be on what they're doing. And so they have to kind of corral people into different parts of the city to make life easier. And so Holiday Woo is brought in. Holiday Woo, this is our introduction to... listen, I know this is an unpopular opinion, but Holiday Woo is one of my favourite characters. And I'm going to talk more about her as this book goes on, because I think I know why people are mad at her. But I also think that she is maybe one of the most misunderstood characters. And I'll tell you for why later on when she reappears. But this is our first introduction to Holiday Woo, who is very stylish and fabulous in her three-piece eggplant coloured or aubergine coloured suit. And Holiday Woo is from the Public Distraction Department. So she is kind of the head of how are we going to point people away from this? How are we going to distract people and make sure that they don't really have an understanding of what's going on. And she's very good at her job, can I just say. And she starts taking suggestions, and people are suggesting all sorts of things, fireworks displays and citywide blackout and a targeted tornado and a parade, and she just shoots them down because too noisy, we did that last year, too expensive, blah blah blah. And finally it's Jupiter who comes up with the winning suggestion, which is something called Golder's Night. And they go on to plan this, and it's a big kind of rapid fire brainstorming session, and Morrigan sort of finally feels like, oh, this is the real Wondrous Society that I am seeing in action. This is what we're here for. And it's very clear that they've all done this a lot of times. So anyway, that's their experience of their first gathering, and they leave, and it's a little weird with Unit 919. No one is quite sure what to say. Morrigan and her friends didn't speak for a long time. It felt like someone had just thrown a hand grenade into their midst. And before they can even start to talk about what has just happened and what they have just learned, they are accosted by a group of older students. Now you know why everyone hates Wundersmiths, said a boy from Unit 917. because we're always having to clean up your mess. I told you she was dangerous, a familiar girl with moss green hair and a nasty scowl squared up to Morrigan, casually tapping a steel throwing star against the side of her leg. Ugh, Eloise Redchurch, not her again. And so they're bailed up by these older scholars, basically saying, like, this is obviously why they kept your knack a secret for so long, is because they knew that we would all hate you, basically, and that maybe we would want to get revenge on you for all of the terrible things that Wundersmiths have done. But you know who's there is Unit 919, and it's a very different ballgame to last year. They've passed their loyalty trial. They are brothers and sisters, loyal for life. They are a unit, and everyone steps in to defend Morrigan in their own little way. Cadence says, yeah, she is dangerous, so am I want to have a go. And Thaddeus says, I know 6 different martial arts and I can swing a sledgehammer like it's a yo-yo. Hawthorne says, I know dragons. And Francis says, I have poisonous mushrooms at home. And then the best one of all, the most unexpected contribution here is from Anar, who says, and I could cut out your liver with a scalpel. In sterile conditions, obviously, and only if they were under a general anaesthetic. And the rest of Unit 919 are so shocked by this and so tickled that they all just burst out laughing, and they leave the horrible group of bullies in their dust, and they head off, and it's the last day of the term, and they're going home for Christmas holidays, so what could be better? And when Morrigan gets back to the Hotel Deucalion, she is a bit miffed because this is a really big secret that, once again, Jupiter has been keeping from her. Even though, I guess, technically he's sort of sworn to secrecy in the Wondrous Society, she's still like, a bit of warning might have been nice. And Jupiter has completely anticipated that she might feel this way, and he has made her favourite cake, which he has treated as an apology note. So he's written an apology letter on this cake that says, sorry I didn't tell you about C and D, but the thing is I can't always tell you everything, and I know that's not ideal, but it is what it is. Sometimes there are other people I have to protect and other promises I have to keep, but I promise I will never lie about anything that might endanger you, because even if telling you all my secrets can't be my top priority, I promise that protecting you always will be. Kindest regards, Jupiter. P.S. Happy last day of term. Now we know what the Wondrous Society is really for. Chapter 4, Dangerous Levels of Cheer. I have found a chapter that we can just whiz through. I'm going to get this one in under a minute because you don't need me to explain the stuff that happens in here. Mostly it's ambient Christmas fun stuff. Jupiter can't stop singing, Fen's frolicking, Frank is annoyed that his Christmas theme has been vetoed by the Hotel Deucalion, who has created a foresty woodland wonderland in the lobby, complete with woodland animals being cute. The key thing is that Morrigan every night has been practicing the skills that Ezra Squall taught her. Her 2 wondersmithy skills that she's got. She can call wonder like an absolute expert now, and she can also breathe fire. Using the art of Inferno, she can conjure fire, and she can light candles, and she's very, very, very pleased with herself that she can do at least these 2 things. And as she is lighting the candles in the hallway, Jack comes and calls her a show-off, and then they are off to go to the Battle of Christmas Eve. End of chapter. It was just over 1 minute. I did pretty well, I think. Okay, I gotta take my little doggies to bed now because it's 5 a.m. and they're really mad at me for working this late. But someone a couple of videos back asked me to show the dogs in one of these videos, and so here's Rick. He's a sleepy boy. I don't know why they're mad, because all they've been doing is sleeping and snoring this whole time. They just like their routine. So this is Rick, and Vivian is a lot bigger and heavier, and he is on the floor, kind of hiding his face in between 2 fluffy dog beds. Hiding his face from the light, but I'll see if he will come up and say hello. But this is baby Rick. Or is he a sleepy guy? Do you have anything to say, Rick? Would you like to... Here's the microphone. Would you like to speak to the people? No, he thinks it's a toy. I shouldn't even say that word. He thinks it's a TOY. He is TOY obsessed. Sorry, Rick, it's not one of those. It's not for you. Chapter 5, 6 Swifts, 2 Cats. So we are experiencing Christmas Eve for the second time in these books. Of course, in Wundersmith there was no Christmas because we only got up to Hallowmas. So this is Morrigan's second Christmas in Nevermoor, and they go and they experience the Battle of Christmas Eve with the Yule Queen and St. Nicholas again, and she loves it just as much as the first time. And my favourite bit of this battle is the bit with the snow dragon and the firebird, which if you have seen I don't have it here with me, all of my other editions are at my other office, but if you've seen the UK paperback cover for Hollowpox, which was illustrated by Hannah Peck, it features the Firebird and the Snow Dragon and Morrigan, of course, and it looks very cool. As a side note, someone suggested or asked a little while ago whether I would at some point give you like a tour of all of the different like foreign editions and covers of the book, and I think that's a really cool idea. It won't be part of these videos, but at some point I might do a little 5-10 minute video just showing you some of my favorite covers. I know that people like that sort of thing. I like that sort of thing. Some of them are really cool. So yeah, at some point I may drop that here or on Insta or somewhere. Anyway, that's not part of this. The other thing that happens here is after the Battle of Christmas Eve, Morrigan gets to go home with the Swift family. She goes to La Maison Swift and partakes in their Christmas Eve tradition of putting a bunch of different foods on skewers and toasting it on the fire, which honestly, great tradition. And on the way there, they get separated. Basically, it's Dave, adult Dave. It's Dave's worst nightmare, as we know. Dave is a worrywart, and it's very busy after the Battle of Christmas Eve, and they're in the Wonderground station, and it's very crowded, and Hawthorne, Morrigan, and baby Dave get separated from the rest of them. The rest of them also includes Helena, when we've met Helena for the first time, the eldest Swift sibling. She's home from her school for the holidays, and you know, it's fine. They go into separate carriages. They know where they live, so they're all gonna get off at the same place, except Dave's worst nightmare, something dangerous happens. There is a leopard, or a leopard one, on the carriage that Morrigan and Hawthorne are, and it's behaving very strangely. It's clawing at people and hissing and growling, and it's jumping all over the furniture, and it's behaving like a leopard, even though it is quite clearly a leopard one. Morrigan knows it's a leopard one rather than a leopard, only because the big cat wore a chunky string of beads around its neck and a big, expensive-looking diamond earring in the tip of one of its furry ears, and, well, because it was riding the Wonderground, which would have been highly irregular for an ordinary leopard. So here we learn a little bit more of how to distinguish Wunimals minor and Wunimals major. Or as I said in here, Wunimal minors and Wunimal majors, but in hindsight, I think it should be Wunimals minor and Wunimals major. But anyway, that's just whatever. From a distance, if you see a Wunimal and an Unimal, it could be hard to distinguish them. It was, of course, easier if you were looking at a Wunimal minor, a sort of human-animal hybrid, usually with more humanoid features than animal. With Wunimal majors, who were physically indistinguishable from their animal counterparts, there was more scope for confusion. That is, until they opened their mouths to complain about the weather or to ask where they might find the nearest brolly rail platform. That's why most majors wore specially tailored clothes, or at least accessorized with a jaunty hat or a monocle or something to signal their sentient Wunimal status and avoid the embarrassing assumptions of strangers. Now, if it wasn't for the jewellery that this leopard one was wearing, Morrigan would think this was a leopard, an animal that had escaped from the zoo, because she is not acting like a leopard one at all, and she seems to suddenly go for them. So Morrigan is holding baby Dave, and this leopard one seems like it's about to attack baby Dave, and Morrigan and Hawthorne are two young teenagers who are suddenly in charge of looking after a toddler, so this is very bad news. Oh no, wait, sorry. The first thing is that Morrigan sees the leopard one's eyes. They suddenly glow bright green, as if a light has been switched on behind them. We're putting a pin in that because that's important for later. So the day is saved. The day is saved, as it so often is, by a group of tough ladies with big handbags who wallop this leopard one before she can attack anyone and basically shoo her off of the train at the next stop. Phew! And Morrigan and Hawthorne make the very wise decision to not mention any of this to adult Dave, because he will just blame himself somehow for them all getting separated, and he's stressed enough. So they all go back to the Swift family home, and they talk about how amazing the spectacle was in Courage Square, and talk turns to dragons, of course, because of the snow dragon, and Hawthorne mentions how Nan has promised him that when he is tournament ready in a few years, when he starts riding in tournaments, he might get a dragon of his own, which of course his siblings do not believe. But Helena brings up the fact that dragons are really weirdly named. She says that they're named not creatively but narcissistically. Why? She says, why do they have such dumb names? So from the beginning, from book one, I have always given dragons in competition or in flight some pretty dumb names, like flies on the back of the wind like a discarded sweet wrapper and glimmers like an oil slick on the ocean. And Hawthorne here explains finally. So I wrote this scene like years and years and years ago, and I had been waiting to include it, and then I finally got a chance to put it right here in Hollowpox, where Hawthorne explains that dragon names in dragon sport, like in competition dragon riding, are so strange because they have to get really creative, since in all of the history of dragon sport, every dragon entered into a competition has to have a unique name. And so obviously with all those dragons over many years, they've had to get really creative and like drill deep into the specifics. But Helena points out they're not creative, they're actually narcissistic, they're all very egotistical. Everyone knows that when an owner or a rider names a dragon, they're talking about themselves when they call them things like on a glorious flight to valor and victory, or defeats his enemies with fire and fury, or whatever, or look how big his talons are. And so we then have this very silly conversation with all of the Swifts. Helena suggests, if you ever do really get a dragon, why don't you name it something about yourself that is actually true, like tries his best but is mostly an idiot. And then all of the Swifts start naming what each other's dragons would be, like doesn't realize how loud she snores, farts like a draft horse, blah blah blah. It's just, if you live in the kind of family that I grew up in, where you're always teasing each other and trying to come up with the best singer and whatever, then this is a familiar scene to you. And I really wanted to include this scene, even though it just feels very like silly and self-indulgent, because it says a lot about why Hawthorne is the way that he is. He is a kid who jokes a lot, jokes about his friends, makes fun of people, but he's always very happy to laugh at himself, and he's always very happy for people to make fun of him as well, because it is this kind of mark of affection. And we see that that's the kind of family that he was brought up in, is like, we tease each other, we make fun of each other, and we're being, affectionate. Morrigan is watching all of this, and of course she finds it really funny, and she loves hanging out with the Swifts, but there's this other niggling feeling, and she realizes that it's jealousy, because she's watching them have this thing that she just never had. She never had this growing up. She calls them a puzzle with no missing pieces, which is a way that she never felt growing up with the crows. It was just a small ache coming from some deep and probably unimportant place inside, almost imperceptible if she didn't pay too much attention to her feelings. And Morrigan tried not to make a habit of paying too much attention to her feelings. That's not very healthy, Morrigan. But it was there, and she didn't like it. The Swifts were good people. They were always kind to her, always made her feel welcome. It seemed ungrateful somehow to nurse this small resentment. And so, as always, Morrigan has this self-awareness when she's experiencing this very human feeling of like she's jealous, and she's been jealous of Hawthorne for various reasons before in their friendship. And she calls it a small resentment. She doesn't resent him. It's very human and normal to kind of feel jealous of other people, including our friends. But it doesn't stop her from kind of feeling guilty about it. And that's the end of Christmas Eve. Chapter 6, De Flimsy. Warning. I think this is the silliest chapter I've ever written. Definitely contains some of the silliest dialogue. Frankly, I love it. Sue me. Sue me for enjoying my own silliness. Here's my advice to you. You gotta enjoy your own silliness. If you can't enjoy your silly self, you can't expect others to enjoy your silly self. Anyway, so it's Christmas Day. Various fun Christmas things happen in the morning. They ice skate on a most improbable, wonderful lake, frozen lake, that is somehow inside the Hotel Deucalion. And they have an amazing Christmas Day feast, as always. And then they are ending the day, our kind of core Deucalion family. So Morrigan, Jupiter, Jack, Fen, Frank, Kedgeree, Martha, Charlie, Dame Chanda. I think that's everyone. They're in the little private staff room, and they're doing Christmas Day things. They're doing puzzles and playing board games, and Dame Chanda is flipping through the newspaper looking for reviews of her Christmas pantomime that she has just done. What she finds instead, though, is something a little bit disturbing. She finds an article about a friend of hers called Juvella de Flimsy. Even the origins of this chapter are very silly. I think I was at Cheltenham Book Festival, Cheltenham Writers Festival, Literature Festival, Cheltenham. It's a Cheltenham festival. And it was the end of the day. And I don't even remember what the conversation was, honestly, but I do remember we were at a train station. I was chatting with a little group, and among them was Catherine Doyle, Cat Doyle, who is the Irish author of lots of different books, perhaps most notably, or one of my favourites anyway, The Stormkeeper's Island. Very funny, lovely gal, and we were chatting about something, and I misheard something. I think I said something about the dress she was wearing, and I misheard what she said, and I thought that she had said it was de flimsy. She was saying it was flimsy. Maybe it was like too flimsy for the cool weather or something like that, and I thought she said and I was like, de flimsy? And anyway, it was just one of those dumb conversations that comes out of someone mishearing something, and the joke became that that's the name of the designer of the dress, it was made by de flimsy. Anyway, it just became this joke, and I was like, I'm gonna put that in my book because it's so silly. And so I did. Thanks, Kat. Anyway, Juvella de Flimsy is a fashion designer, and something has happened to her. She's in hospital, and Dame Chanda and Frank are talking about this icon, this magnificent Juvella de Flimsy, and Jack and Morgan haven't heard of her. And so this is the silly conversation where they explain to her who this person is and why she's so phenomenal and important. And Dame Chanda says, darlings, de Flimsy is everything. De Flimsy is life. De Flimsy is a genius, added Frank, looking sombre as he picked up the discarded newspaper and read the news for himself. This is de Flimsy, Dame Chanda continued, gesturing to her green embroidered silk gown. At least a third of my wardrobe is by de Flimsy. My favourite perfume is Flimsy by de Flimsy. My second favourite perfume is Whimsy by de Flimsy, which I am wearing as we speak, and for which I am a brand ambassador and billboard model. She held her hand to her chest and lowered her head, taking a little bow. This, I think, is the dumbest, silliest line I've ever written, and I have zero regrets. What a coincidence, said Frank, sniffing at his wrists. I'm wearing Whimsy by de Flimsy for Himsy. It's so silly, it's so dumb. It's such a dumb joke, but sometimes you just gotta put a dumb joke in a book, and that's all I have to say about that. Anyway, it's terrible news. Dame Chanda goes on to say, oh, but this is dreadful. It says here she was found early this morning, lying half buried in the snow, eyes wide open but completely, catatonically unresponsive. Nobody knows how she got there. She's in the Royal Light Wing Wundermore Hospital, in some sort of waking coma. They don't know when or if she'll recover. Oh, poor Juvella. Whatever could have happened to her? And Morgan comes around to look at this newspaper article. She says, I do know her. I've seen her. I saw her on the Wonderground last night because Juvella de Flimsy is our leopard one that was kicked off the train by the tough old ladies with capacious handbags. They had very capacious bags. And it's de Flimsy. And Morgan explains what happened on the train to Jupiter and Dame Chanda, who both know this woman, and they are shocked. And Dame Chanda says, no, that couldn't be her. She says, I don't think so, darling. Juvella doesn't take public transport. She has a driver. I heard she has a whole roster of drivers, said Frank, and a fleet of motor cars. And here is the other very, very silly line that I think is maybe my favourite thing that Fen ever says in any of these books. She perks up. She's sleeping and snoring on the ground, and hearing this conversation about Juvella de Flimsy, she perks up and she says, I heard she rides a unicorn everywhere she goes and uses it to stab people wearing last season's shoes. She's clearly making a sarcastic joke, and it's so inappropriate. She is talking about someone who is in a coma in hospital. And she's making a joke about. Anyway, it's so Fen. It's just such a Fenestra moment. They don't really believe Morgan, but they are trying not to say that she's lied. They're saying, well, look, we believe that you think you saw that. Or at least that's what Dame Chanda says. Oh, yes, I'm sure that you believe that's what you saw, but it couldn't possibly have been Juvella. I know her. She's my friend. She would never do that. She would never behave the way that you've just described. And Jupiter says, listen, we've got to keep this under wraps. This conversation needs to stay among us. He says, when it comes to Wundermores, some people already have certain opinions. The tabloids love a story about Wundermores behaving badly, and a famous Wundermore. Well, we just don't want anyone forming a conclusion about what happened before we know what happened. That's all. It wouldn't be fair to Juvella. And then he and Dame Chanda decide to go off and find her in the hospital and take her some flowers.